Good evening, I'm Britt Hume. This is the time of night I normally would be saying welcome to Washington, but Washington this day is a place where not even the President of the United States was considered safe. The Pentagon is on fire after a terrorist attack. The Capitol and nearly all other federal buildings were evacuated. Warplanes patrol the skies above here, and warships have been dispatched to secure the Potomac River. The President, after spending much of the day in the air aboard Air Force One for security reasons, is now on his way back here and plans to address the nation tonight. This after a day like no other in this city or this country's history, a day where even the extraordinary events that occurred here in Washington were overshadowed by the horror of what took place in New York, where my colleague Shepard Smith is standing by. Rick Leventhal is standing by. Rick Leventhal, give us a brief update, if you can, of the scene there in New York and what you've gone through.
Might collapse, and indeed it did just about 30 minutes ago. World Trade number 7, a 47-story office tower adjacent to the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, came crashing to the ground. It had been involved in flames for several hours, and there were flames inside the building. And in fact, it did, as I mentioned about 30 minutes ago, come crashing down. So the skyline of New York City continues to change. And you see deep smoke, thick smoke down Church Street. We're just a few blocks north of where the World Trade Center complex is located. Still flames on the ground, still flames in the rubble of what's left of the World Trade Center, which is slowing the search for survivors and the recovery of the dead in this monumental terrorist attack.
So, Rick, we now have 3 buildings down in New York. The first 2 trade towers we saw went down as a result of direct hits by flying aircraft, and now this 3rd building, which is considered his tower, I believe we call it Tower number 7. This has been a day when the President of the United States learned of these events while at an event in Sarasota, Florida, an education event. This was a normal day. The President out. He was talking about his education program, his education proposals. He was whisked away from that event, put aboard Air Force One to go we know not where, and then after stopping at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, making a videotaped statement there at the Air Force Base and leaving it behind, he went on his way and was in the air for much of the rest of the afternoon, bound for an Air Force Base in Nebraska. We didn't know he was going there. Perhaps he didn't either. Brian Wilson is standing by at the Pentagon to bring us up to date on what has been going on there and what is expected to go on there as the evening wears on. Brian?
Britt, I think you can see over my shoulder that there is still smoke smoldering up from the ruins of the south side of the Pentagon. It happened at 9:40. A United Airlines jet slammed into the south side of the Pentagon, penetrating the E, D, and C rings. All people aboard inside the aircraft were, of course, killed, and we have no firm numbers about how many people inside the Pentagon may have been injured or killed. We do know that, however, the work of the military is still going on, and it is being directed from this building. In the basement, there is something known as the National Military Command Center, and we understand it is up and operational. In the next few minutes, we are expecting a briefing from Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, where he will give us the latest information about what is going on. But I must tell you, Britt, it has been a day of chaos, a day in which we have had not great information, in which members of Capitol Hill have criticized the intelligence community for having no advance warning of these incredible, horrible attacks in Washington, D.C. and in New York City. So here at the Pentagon, the cleanup continues. You see over my shoulder, the damage is still smoldering. And I must tell you that initially a lot of the building withstood the impact. It was only after a great deal of fire and a moment when the firemen had to move out of the area that the building you see behind me collapsed to the state it is in right now. But we are going to hear from the Secretary of Defense, and this is a very tough building, and deep within the bowels of the Pentagon, the largest building in Washington, the military is still being directed, and operations continue. Britt?
Brian, I still see what appears to be smoke rising from the building over your left shoulder near that great cavity that we see in the wall of the building. May I take it that the fire, if not out, is at least now under control?
It is contained, and what you're seeing are the smoldering ruins, but they still continue to cool with their fire trucks. The fire really got to rage for a while because there was such concern there might be a second plane on its way that they pulled out even the firefighters after the first attack. So the damage from the fire was fairly substantial.
All right, Brian Wilson there at the Pentagon. Brian, thank you very much. We've been, before we talked to Brian, I was mentioning that the President of the United States had spent much of the day in the air, hopping from one Air Force base to another, finally stopping there near Omaha. at Offutt Air Force Base, which is that used to serve as the headquarters of the old Strategic Air Command, and he is now headed back to Washington. But this was a day in which his advisors were to some extent split on what he ought to do and how he ought to handle this situation. I'm joined here in the studio by our senior White House correspondent, Jim Angle. Jim, obviously this was a day when many people in the country doubtless felt they would like to hear from their government, and particularly from their president. They did via videotape. They have not since this morning otherwise heard from him. What went on that we know about?
Well, it was a very difficult day, obviously. First you have the shock of what had happened, but then the president's advisors, his political advisors, were saying the president needs to get back to Washington. Obviously the country is upset by this, and there's a certain amount of panic that enters in when you see people being killed, people leaping on fire out of flaming buildings. What the advisors wanted to do was bring him back to show the president in charge, to show the nation that the government is functioning, that the president is at the helm. Secret Service, however, wanted to take the president to NORAD headquarters at Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs, which is inside a mountain, several feet of steel doors protecting it, originally against nuclear attack. That's where they wanted to take the president to keep him safe. They said they could not guarantee the president's safety if he were in the White House and a hijacked airliner crashed into the building. That would leave them in the position if someone took off, let's say, from Bermuda and flew toward the White House. The Secret Service says we would have to decide whether or not to shoot that plane out of the air.
I gather, though, how the matter's been resolved in favor of bringing him back here for remarks to the nation tonight. We expect at 9 p.m. In the meantime, in New York City, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who, of course, has had to preside over all of the efforts that are being made for research and recovery and further security, is giving a briefing. Let's listen.
People of the city of New York should act differently. We should act bravely. We should act in a tolerant way. We should go about our business, and we should show these people that they can't stop us, and they can't. Governor?
This is obviously still an ongoing effort to deal with the consequences of this horrible disaster. I want to commend the mayor first and his professional team. I don't think there's any finer group in America or the world, and they're doing an excellent job, and we're proud to have the National Guard and other state resources here helping as well. I want to thank my colleagues, the governors from the surrounding states. I've heard from virtually every governor, and we're getting help from Pennsylvania and Connecticut and New Jersey to deal with specialized needs to respond to the crisis that we still face. The goal right now is very simple. Everything that can be done to save every single life is being done, and we will continue to make sure that that is a priority. But we're going to get through this, and we're going to get through this strong. And just about an hour ago, I was out on the street in front of Cabrini Hospital, and you see New Yorkers from all walks of lives, more than a block long, waiting in line to donate blood to help the victims of this disaster. It's that spirit. It's that pulling together and that refusal to be intimidated in the face of this horrible terror that's going to make sure that this city, this state, and this country come back stronger than ever, and that the freedoms that we are entitled to have as Americans will not be lost because of this terror. So, Mayor, again, we're here. We'll do everything we can to make sure we support you.
Barry, you want to say a few words from the FBI?
I'm Barry Martin with the FBI. I'm the Assistant Director. As the Governor and the Mayor just mentioned, we have taken the investigation. We'll take a back seat to search and rescue. Obviously, personal safety is #1 concern, even for us in law enforcement. I have talked, just generally speaking, this is going to be coordinated, is being coordinated by FBI in Washington at our headquarters. We have the various offices already actively engaged where some of the planes were hijacked, such as Boston, where it crashed in Somerset, Pennsylvania. We're doing all of that. The lead office and coordinating office will be the New York office, with the primarily because of the Joint Terrorism Task Force that we have here with NYPD, as well as all the other federal agencies. We are gathered. Probably the only thing that I would mention is we are bringing, probably when we get to a point that we can, the immediate search or preliminary search will be for the black boxes from the 2 planes here. We have NTSB coming in to assist us in that regard. Further, at maybe subsequent briefings, if we are not successful, we will have pictures to show, or the mayor will have pictures to show in an aid to assist us in that effort. That's where we are at the moment.
One other thing I'd like to once again commend St. Vincent's Hospital. We were there a little bit earlier after we talked to you. They've taken care of over 300 people so far, and they needed water. The sanitation department has delivered 2 tankers of water to them so they can carry on their emergency efforts. If there are other hospitals that need help,
and explosions in the air. It is not clear what they're caused by, whether these are bombs, if they are bombs, by whom they were dropped, or missiles by whom they were sent. But this is what the situation looks like in the air above Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. Afghanistan, of course, is the country which harbors or has harbored Osama bin Laden, the terrorist leader who has been mentioned repeatedly as a suspect in this bombing and in a number of other incidents of terrorism affecting the United States. So we see that dark skies there in Afghanistan, and there you see smoke there in the background, what looks like a blaze visible, perhaps the result of explosives being dropped on that city. Now, this is CNN material that has been made available to all networks. We thank our colleagues at CNN for making this available. I believe this has been done by video phone. So a glimpse of that, and as we learn more about it and see more of it, we will indeed come back to it. In New York, most of those who have been injured have been taken, or many of those have been taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, which is located not too far from the World Trade Center in Manhattan. And our colleague, correspondent Catherine Herridge, has been there for much of the day watching that scene unfold at St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan. Catherine, give us a sense of the situation now. Has it calmed down there at all, or are people still coming in?
It's quite frenetic. Actually, in the last few minutes, we've had about 11 ambulances come into St. Vincent's, and we had a briefing about an hour ago from some of the senior officials who confirmed to us that they've taken 297 patients so far, approximately 45 in critical condition. Among that total, 42 rescue workers, so firefighters and police officers. Fortunately, many of them just had minor injuries, abrasions to the eye because of the concrete dust in the air. One of the hospital workers telling me that when some of them came in, they were so coated with soot that you couldn't tell whether they were police officers or firefighters. So far, they have been able to confirm 3 deaths. When they asked what the cause was, they said significant blunt injuries. In some cases, they fell to their deaths. The majority of injuries so far among the victims that were in the buildings are smoke or dust inhalation, as well as multiple fractures and lacerations. Now, we also heard from New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani, as well as the Police Commissioner Bernard Carrick, about an hour and a half ago. They confirmed to us that the National Guard is helping. They've had about 200 guardsmen in the city, and they're expecting about 1,500 this evening. As you can hear, it's very busy here still. Ambulances, crews coming in, and there's some concern at St. Vincent's that they may run out of water. In fact, we've had 2 water trucks come so that will not happen. Again, as we heard in the briefing a few minutes ago, the mayor has praised people in the city for remaining calm, for showing bravery and dignity, and in his perspective, that has helped reduce the loss of life. And I'm quoting from the mayor here: New York City is a lot stronger than this. We're going to overcome it. We're going to be an example of how to stand up to terrorism, and it's important for people not to be afraid. And there's just one anecdote I want to share with you. Earlier, when I was down near the World Trade Center, I talked to a firefighter, and I asked him what the scene was in there. And the first and most important thing to him was that 8 members of his company were missing. And it's clear from the EMS that they expect there are people alive that are still trapped in the rubble grid.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. My colleague Shepard Smith, who has been narrating these events from New York for so much of the day, now joins us. Shep, set the scene for us there in New York in our studios.
In large part today in New York, Britt, there is calm across most of the city. Large parts of the transportation network are not functioning. The mayor says now that that about half the subway lines within the city are functioning. Most of the high-rises throughout the building have been evacuated, except for essential personnel throughout the day. And now the building in which we sit now is occupied by Fox News Channel and little else. This was the scene this morning, just after 9 o'clock, as that jumbo jet crashed into the World Trade Center. To stand on the roof of the Fox News World Headquarters in Midtown and to look due south is really mind-boggling.